In many countries today, terrible things happen to Christians, but thus far nobody in Canada is thrown to the lions or sent to a gulag. But we shall hear today from Christians whose public testimony, words and actions that 20 years ago would have prompted no comment, let alone opposition, have in fact brought trouble upon their heads. In other words, think of the difference between a movie and a snapshot. A snapshot of religious freedom in Canada suggests that people who question it might be thought by non-Christians to be a little touchy. But if you could make a movie of it, you'd recognize that something alarming is gathering pace. I dare say none of us, for instance, thought we'd live to see the day when a government minister would openly muse about prosecuting pastors who, or anybody in fact, who quoted what the Bible says about sexuality and then introduced legislation to make that prosecution possible. I'm speaking of Bill C-9, of course. Now, I'm happy to tell you that for the short term it's in park, but Canadians elected last year a government that was prepared to do this. So I would respectfully say we must ask ourselves, my friends, what exactly do the majority of Canadians mean when they sing in the national anthem, God Keep Our Land? We're not doing our best. Now, one person who is asking that question and doing something about it is our first speaker, Faytene Grasseschi. Faytene mobilizes Canadian Christians to engage our elected officials, which is exactly what needs to be done. She has spoken to parliamentary committees and is regarded as a voice on social justice issues, both at Parliament and grassroots forums across Canada. She organizes national prayer events, internship programs for Christian students on Parliament Hill, and in 2024 ran for office provincially in New Brunswick's most recent election. During that election, Faytene was consistently and viciously attacked for her faith, not for her political opinions, but for her faith. Her work has been featured on various national and regional news outlets across Canada. She was recognized by Charisma magazine as one of the world's top 21 most influential next-generation leaders and has been awarded a leadership award in Jerusalem. Fittingly, she calls her remarks today the day they let the dogs out, the chilling reality of political harassment in Canada. As we welcome her, let's keep in mind that she's on duty right now. Her organization helped mobilize Canadians to make more than 40,000 phone calls to members of Parliament, urging them to oppose Bill C-9. She is doing what she needs to do. Faytene, it's your podium.
Thank you, Mr. Hannaford. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Is my mic working here? So much respect for the incredible, legendary Nigel Hannaford, and thank you to JoJo and the entire team and the Met staff and team. It is just so wonderful and terrifying to be here today. Oh, it's nice to be loved, my goodness. I know the alternative a little bit. So I've been asked by JoJo to share about my experience with political harassment and violence in Canada as a candidate in the 2024 New Brunswick provincial election. Can we get the slides up, please? My presentation, I'm going to move fast. I do want to warn you right out of the gate that I will be sharing my mature and triggering content. I know it's triggering for me. It's been extremely difficult. I've done a lot of public speaking over my professional career, and I want to be raw and let you know this has been the most challenging presentation that I've ever prepared. It's been very emotional putting these slides together, but I'm praying that the Lord will give me the strength to speak with clarity and accuracy and also relevance to those of you in the room and for this moment. I know that we're all here today because we value our precious religious freedoms in Canada. I want to begin by sharing a chilling experience that was a defining moment for me the night of October the 20th, 2024, in a small rural subdivision just outside of a New Brunswick town called Hampton. As a candidate in the provincial election, I was leaving it all on the field. My dad played NHL hockey. He taught us how to leave it all on the ice. Every spare moment that I had, I was knocking on doors and connecting with voters face to face. And I had been knocking on doors all day this particular day. It was the night before the last day of the campaign. The sun was beginning to set. And I pulled up to a house. This isn't the exact house. I did a AI regeneration of my memory of what the house looked like. I pulled up to a house. I had been to this house at least twice before, but I had never caught the owner home. I walked up to the front door like I always did, and I did one of my happy knocks. No one came to the door, and so I began to briskly walk back towards my car. Then suddenly, a motion sensor light came on the side of the house. As I mentioned, the sun was beginning to set, and so the light was triggered. And on the side of the house, there was a yard with a chain link fence, about 4 feet tall, you know, those kinds that are a little bit rickety, easy to jump. I walked towards the shadowed figure, and he walked towards me. And when we were within about 4 feet of one another, I saw his face. He saw mine. He clearly recognized me. You know, my face by that point was all over the writing on signs and social media feeds, in promotions and in attacks. And as we locked eyes, his face visibly changed right before me. And I wish I could relay how chilling and creepy, ominous this encounter was. He looked directly into my eyes and said, "Oh, you're evil." I was a little bit taken aback, and I said, "No, actually, I'm not." Kind of a nervous laugh, you know. He turned abruptly, walked back towards his house, and I just kind of was there a little bit stunned and thinking to myself, okay, that was really weird, and this is clearly going nowhere. And so I started going back to my car, and within moments, I heard a loud snarling, panting, and barking, and two ravenous German Shepherd dogs, about 150 to 200 pounds, were charging towards me in his side yard, and the only thing between us was this rickety chain link fence, and I didn't want to stick around to see if they could scale it. I knew enough to know that the latches on these fences were not very robust. The dogs were throwing their bodies into the chain link fence right at my direction, snarling, foaming, barking as they tried to break through the fence to get at me. I got into my car, slammed the door, started the ignition, and drove away as fast as I could, literally trembling behind the steering wheel. Later, I would come to understand that what I was experiencing was a legitimate physical trauma response. But I drove home stunned and shocked, both by the intensity of his words, "You are evil, you're evil," and these bloodthirsty animals that he had just loosed in my direction. And I had never experienced such vitriol. As my mind began to process what had just happened, I realized that had the dogs actually broken through the fence, I would likely have been lying on that driveway in a pool of my own blood at that very moment, perhaps gasping for my life. The violent intent was palpable and deeply rattling in Canada in 2024. I went home and I told my husband what had just happened. You might say back, well, why didn't you guys go down to the police? The honest answer is this, is that by that point, 14 months into a campaign, we had become so accustomed to hate. And I had only 24 hours left before the GOTV, the election. And that night, my kids needed me. They hadn't seen me all day. They needed me to put them to bed. I didn't have time to go sit in a police station for 4 hours making reports. And not to mention, I was still very much paralyzed by the trauma of it all. But I remember thinking, how does it get to this? How did we get to the point in Canada in 2025 when someone who has never had a conversation with me is so filled with hatred towards me? His countenance changed when he saw my face. How could somebody be so filled with hatred towards me, somebody they had never met before, that they would be willing to release their killer dogs on a charge, command them to charge at me? And to answer that question, I need to go back to the beginning of this chapter of our life. This is my family, my beautiful family. In 2020, my family and I moved from Ontario during the lockdowns to New Brunswick. We found what we believed was our dream home, and it was, and it actually still is. An affordable waterfront home in New Brunswick, 1.2 acres with deers lancing through the yard, lilies, lupas, and raspberries. Our kids were in sports. They had wonderful Christian friends, a great church. We were thriving. Successful television show, doing from my home in my pajama pants. We were living the dream. But in the summer of 2023, our worlds changed when New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs, one of the best leaders that our nation has ever known, took a stand for parental rights, saying that if a child was changing their gender or name at school, that their parents should be informed. And that triggered, as we all remember, a national firestorm of debate on this topic and ended up impacting the entire nation, and leaders across Canada then beginning to take stands, whether it was Scott Moe or Danielle Smith. But Premier Blaine Higgs was absolutely crucified by the leftist national media for his stand for parental rights. At the time, Angus Reid actually commissioned a poll that showed that absolutely the Premier was on the right side of history and the right side of Canadians. The majority of Canadians agreed with the Premier, and I definitely agreed with him. I actually had a friend at church whose niece had been medically transitioned in the town of Hampton without her mother's consent, ended up regretting it, wanting to detransition, and her body never came back. I was definitely on the side that parents should never be deleted from the lives of their children by the government, and so was all of society. And so our organization, For My Canada, launched a petition called Don't Delete Parents. Some of you perhaps did sign it. It was a national petition. But thousands of New Brunswickers signed that petition in a matter of a couple of weeks. This moment sent shockwaves through the political context in New Brunswick and ended up saving Premier Blaine Higgs' political leadership from a full-blown revolt, and also led to me running for office alongside him to stand for parental rights and for lowering taxes. So controversial, right? Then the media response quickly came. And when I say media, I don't mean alternative media. I mean the CBC, Global, Telegraph Journal. Very soon the labels were being applied: Christian, conservative candidate, right-wing candidate, Christian evangelist, TV show host, Christian nationalist, Christian dominionist, and then this bizarre article about me being a part of some fictitious organization called the NAR, which I still don't even know what it is. But the playbook was clear. If we label her, and if we can stir enough social negativity and animosity against her, then we can bring her down. Other than, of course, fair coverage from the incredible Western Standard hat tip to Nigel Hannaford on the front row, who was the only periodical across Canada that actually gave honest and fair coverage, saying that I was simply a mom standing for parental rights. None of these organizations, CBC, CTV, etc., had the integrity to simply say what was true, that I was a mom, a successful entrepreneur, a best-selling author, and a voice for the majority view. Nope, only spin and only fear-mongering. Of course, the coverage escalated over 14 months. And then there was finally the call for my disqualification because of my Christian beliefs, spearheaded by a CBC article quoting the Green candidate I was running against as saying that I had to be disqualified because of my views 20 years ago on traditional biblical marriage, at the time when even President Obama agreed with what I was saying. That Green candidate quickly took to Facebook to correct CBC and say that she had said nothing of the sort and that I had every right to run still CBC, pushing this narrative, and the article is still on the internet today. In the wave of all of this mainstream media anti-Christian bigotry, I believe is what it was, social media began to flood with abuse and with cyberbullying. I was told to kill myself. I was told to get the F out of New Brunswick. I was told I was a fascist, a Nazi, a dominionist, a neo-Nazi, a cult leader. AI images were created painting me as a character that was recruiting young women to be raped. Community leaders were ridiculing me on social media, saying that I had a mental illness because I prayed for the sick or prayed at all. We've documented everything, and currently my folder shows that we have 2,162 screen captures of online harassment and hate. Some of these screen captures having multiple comments. We had suspicious activity around our home over this time period. Police patrol had to be dispatched in order to keep our family safe. I ended up in the emergency room in St. John because of stress-induced abdominal pain. My husband stayed awake for 4 months straight, patrolling our property because he was concerned that somebody might show up in the middle of the night and set our house on fire. We did not have a dog. We spent over $100,000 on legal fees to protect ourselves and to protect our church because CBC was planning on sending their chief correspondent to record my pastor's sermons and quote my pastor's sermons in future articles about my faith. I was told, though, by the party and those who were politically astute to simply stay at the doors, and if I knocked on enough, it was a strong riding and I would for sure win. And during that entire time, as I stayed at the doors, all of this abuse really, for the most part, went unchecked and unrestrained. And then this. Hope she doesn't come to my door. I can't stand religious homophobic hypocrisy. Time to let the dogs loose. Time to let the dogs loose. And we see the path of how it gets to this. If you let a hateful narrative run unchecked, unchallenged, long enough, things happen. There were other instances of criminal behavior that I actually cannot talk about. I've been counseled by our lawyer not to talk about publicly unless I'm willing to take the individuals to court. We're already $100,000 deep. So what happened with the election, you might ask? Well, at the end of it, I stayed at the doors, like everybody said to do. But on election night, I ended up losing by 224 votes out of 8,291 in what ended up being a liberal wave of the province. And given all that I just shared, it is honestly miraculous that I even came that close. The premier himself lost by 183 votes. After the election, my beautiful family, my children now 2 years older, we took a month to sleep, some time to heal. And after much prayer and indication, all screen captured, that the toxicity was not going to vanish anytime soon, we recognize that there comes a time and a moment where it's gotten so bad, where you've done what you believe you've been asked to do, and the people have made their choice, and you simply tap your feet. And you bring back your blessing, you knock off the dust, and you move to the promised land of Alberta. We finished my kids' sports season, put a smile on our face, listed our dream home with tears in our eyes. But it didn't stop there. Given that I'm somewhat of a public figure, my team was asking me to do a video update for my friends and supporters, those that watch our TV show, to try to explain why we had, is it 9 minutes? Was it 9 or 1? Okay. To try to explain why we had moved, because you see, we had actually been developing a ministry property, a 10-acre ministry property in New Brunswick, and we needed to explain to our friends and donors why we were no longer in New Brunswick. So at the request of my team, I posted a video on my Facebook to explain to our friends and followers. And there were a few days of hundreds of comments of love and kindness. But then the Telegraph Journal, this is 10 months after the election, the Telegraph Journal, the local newspaper in St. John, decided that my move was provincial news. They printed a story about it, put a screen capture of my video disclosing my location. My mistake on that one. But they printed this in the paper and delivered tens of thousands of newspapers to the doorsteps of New Brunswickers province-wide. And in a minute, the sick hate returned. I do want to read just one comment here. I've spared you of a lot, but this one was particularly hard. Dave, ha ha ha. Go get beeped to Alberta. So glad our riding was responsible for dismissing you from New Brunswick. Go with your bleepity bleep husband and your daughter who sent nude pictures to other boys in Hampton. My daughter doesn't even have a phone. Hope you die soon. We'll donate a few morning after pills to the U.S. and make a donation, donate an abortion in your name. And then it just continued on and on. Rage still raging and lies still running. Again, I want to remind us all of what my primary crime was. My primary crime was standing for parents to be informed when their children are being gender transitioned at school. And my secondary crime being a visible Christian. Jojo framed this summit around a question. Is religious persecution coming, or is it already here? Well, let me ask you this question in response. If what I just explained to you had happened to a liberal female candidate, a Muslim, maybe a Jewish candidate, or an LGBTQ2+ candidate, would there have been an outcry? Well, we know the answer to that, absolutely. Remember the story of Minister Catherine McKenna getting a bit of graffiti on her door? Do you remember the time when Christia Freeland was catcalled or harassed in a foyer in Alberta by somebody who was discontent with the Liberal government at the time? Both of these stories were national news. Why was my family expected to absorb this quietly and take it on the chin just because we were Christians? Was this politics, or is it just blatantly unchecked anti-Christian bigotry and possibly a bit of misogyny? As my time begins to land, I want to close with a few reflections. Obviously, this is heavy content, and this is the first time I've ever shared it. I don't know that I will ever do this again. You see, what actually hurt the most was not the hate from those who don't know the Lord or love the Lord. It was not the threat of violence, though that was tough, obviously. What was the hardest was the silence. It was the silence of brothers and sisters in Christ who saw what was happening, perceived it, knew what my husband and I were standing for, knew us, went to church with us, and just watched it all happen and let it go unchecked. Or worse yet, those, whether locally or across Canada, who called themselves believers in Christ, but were complicit in propagating narratives about me because I'm a charismatic, who drank the lies themselves, whispered it to their friends. She's a radical, she's a dominionist, she's a Christian nationalist, she's extreme. Really? Or maybe she's a mom, a taxpayer, a courageous citizen willing to get into the fight for kids when others stayed home or stayed silent. A citizen of this nation with every right to be a part of the democratic process and access to our charter rights. But I am here today because I am determined to turn pain into power. And I am determined not to get bitter, but to get better and to get stronger, which is the only reason why I'm here to share my story today while it is still clearly very raw. You see, I'm convinced that if we do not expose and confront anti-Christian bigotry, then it will grow without restraint and assault future generations, our children and grandchildren, even worse. It may never be easier to take a stand than it is right now. Today, our sacrifice is a little bit of time, attending a conference, making some phone calls this afternoon regarding C9, because though C9 was paused, it's actually coming back to committee on Monday. Today, the cost is time, maybe a little bit of our reputation. Tomorrow, the cost could be 2 years in prison if C9 passes. We have a moral duty to our children to turn this thing around. And the reality is if a bunch of my friends had gotten on social media and said some nice things about me in that moment, I know her. I know her heart. If there had been thousands of comments of kindness, then that moment the dogs would have been pulled off of me and my family. As believers, we are more powerful than we realize. We are the tipping point that our nation needs. But we need to begin with believing the best about one another. We cannot drink the narratives of those who hate Christ. When a brother or sister steps up for what is right, we need to have each other's backs. Love is what makes us different, and love believes the best, not the rumors and the rhetoric. And not just love for each other, but also love for those who hate us. For no other reason other than that we belong to Jesus. You see, that man, he didn't really think I was evil. He saw Christ as evil. He hated me because he hated the church. But this is our sacred trust. It's to stand with Christ and with the body of Christ, no matter what the cost, and repay evil with love every single time. And trust me, people will notice when you return hate with love. But love doesn't mean that we cancel ourselves or that we pull us out of society for fear of being mistreated. Turning the cheek doesn't mean we disappear. If Jesus had had this approach, he never would have gone to the cross, bloodied, beaten, accused, stripped, maligned in the public square. In the height of the escalation and online hate, a friend asked me, "Why are you staying at this? Why don't you quit?" I considered his words, but immediately thought of my 10-year-old daughter. If I allow myself to be bullied out of the public square, primarily because I am a Christian, then I allow her and future generations to be bullied out of the public square. We do not do the right thing because it's easy. We do it because it's right. And I will never regret standing up for a parent's right not to be deleted from the lives of their children by the government, because that stand led to a domino impact that has impacted provinces nationwide. The only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good men are good women to do nothing. And we know that all things work together for good for those that love God and are called according to my purpose, his purposes. If my family and my experience is only to awaken a few more across Canada to say enough is enough, then it all just might be worth it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your words, Faytene, but thank you for your actions. It is when we stand for Christ that we feel the most pain, but then he felt pain for us. And it is the only chance we have of saving our civilization and beyond Canada, our civilization, as we stand up and say, I will speak for truth. You did. Congratulations. And Alberta is the winner in this.